You're listening to episode 12 of the D6 podcast.
Here's the encouragement I give you. The shortest distance between your child's heart, your grown child's heart, and Christ is you.
Parents need to own that they are the primary disciplers of their child.
Our goal in parenting is not for our kids ultimately to get a great education, as good as that is. Our goal is not for them to be great athletes. Our goal is not for them to go on great dates and find a great husband or a great wife. Our goal is not for them to have a great career with a great job, making great money. Our goal is for them to love a great God.
You're listening to the D6 podcast. Here's your hosts, Ron Hunter and Jeremy Lee.
This is the podcast that helps you build an excellent family ministry in your church. Hey, thanks again for joining us for another week. This is going to be a great week. My good friend Scott Rubin, he works at a little-known church you might have heard of called Willow Creek. His pastor is Bill Hybels, and he runs the whole middle school ministry there, and he's done it for a really long time. He's going to talk to us today about parenting through the middle school years. And I want to say this, if you're a children's minister, don't check out because you have a responsibility to prepare parents for these years. If you're a youth minister, obviously this falls in your world and you are going to get a lot out of today. So no matter where you're ministering, you have a lot to offer, we're offering you a lot today, Ron. Isn't that true?
We do. You know, again, as you said, if you're working in Willow or any one of the other larger churches, you don't fake it. You can't just kind of bluff your way through. And it's very, very evident that Scott has some everyday practical wisdom that he's offering, but he's going to plant some principled seeds in people's heads that they will never, ever forget and can't unthink about it anymore.
Yeah. If there are some people listening who's had personal interactions with Scott, but if you have, I don't know that I've ever met a more genuine person. When you consider the position he has, it's high notoriety. You know, there might be a temptation to have some ego and, you know, some look at me type things. And it's the exact opposite. I've never met such a relational, endearing, and genuine dude than Scott Rubin. That's why you guys are going to enjoy this interview. After the break, we'll hear from Scott Rubin. He's going to talk to us and walk us through parenting in the middle school years, full of great tidbits for you guys. We'll see you after the break.
What's it like to be a member of the D6 Leader Network? Well, what if I told you that you could hire an intern for your ministry that would plan your sermon series each month and create amazing graphics to help promote it? What if that same intern helped you train your volunteers by writing an online teacher training every month that includes a fully produced video without you even having to touch it? What if that same intern created a fully designed parent resource that they can actually use to help them spiritually lead their family? What if that same intern was able to get you access to every main stage talk, breakout, or interview D6 has ever done at their D6 conference for your own training and development? That would be the best intern in the history of the world, right? Well, becoming a member of the brand new D6 Leader Network is like hiring an intern to do all of that and more for around $1 a day. We make your life easy. We make awesome easy. If you are a minister, you can go to d6leadernetwork.com to learn more.
I'm so excited to have my friend. I say I'm excited every time. So I feel like if people are listening to these, they're like, dude, bearded guy, you're always excited. But here's the thing, I really am excited.
So this may not be that exciting is what you're saying.
This is extremely exciting for me. My friend is here, and he is wise and such a good person. that I think you are going to enjoy this. I think. We'll see.
Cross your fingers.
My friend Scott Rubin is the director of Elevate, the junior high ministry at Willow Creek Community Church near Chicago, and he has been on staff at Willow since 1991. You're in your 15th year of working with middle school students and volunteers, and by that alone,
it's like a dream come true, isn't it? That's what people wish for in youth ministry. Could I spend 15 years with the middle schoolers? I'm the lucky man.
Scott quarterbacks Willow Creek's efforts to help moms and dads be intentional about parenting. You just got done saying that you don't do that, but anyway, their kids from birth through high school.
I didn't say I'm a good quarterback. It's just my job. It's just my role.
He also serves on the leadership team at Willow Creek and has done some writing too, like middle school ministry, which is I call that book the textbook for middle school ministry. I just really, really do. The Red Stuff and the teen edition of John Ortberg's The Me I Want to Be. He's a big fan of his wife and his 3 sons, and Tom Izzo.
Basketball, college basketball, Jeremy. That's
Michigan
State. Make sure to add the state. Make sure to add the state, please.
Don't want to.
All right. Let's not get confused.
That's right. So let's start with this. What do you think of Jim Harbaugh?
He's fine with me. He's a little, no, I won't. I won't even go there.
I'm honored to have you here. You're a personal friend, and I love that. I just on top of that, I think you're the nicest guy in the universe.
Not true, but you keep thinking that.
So I want to dive in with this. I'm trying to let every one of my interviews have a theme so that people can just latch on and follow along. Yeah. So and the theme for this one is the parenting in the middle school years. You kind of 15 years now, you better have this dialed in. So that's what I'd love for you to help folks, because if a parent of a child is listening, they're coming upon those middle school years. If you're in that journey yourself, so there's a lot of folks in here who would be interested in that topic. So what should I be doing if I have I do have a child that's soon to be a middle schooler? What do I need to be doing to get ready for that?
Well, it's funny because to me, before I had middle school kids of my own, I thought, how hard can it be? I mean, really, they're older, take a little bit less supervision in some ways, they're more independent in some other ways. And I found out when I had middle school kids that it is harder than it looks, actually. I mean, there's some challenges in the midst of it, but it's harder than it looks. And at the same time, the reason I'm still in it is I just think it's one of the best phases. Not least awkward, not least uncomfortable, but I just think it's one of the best phases, Jeremy, because sincerely, little kids, I mean, there's lots great about little kids. A lot that's great about older teenagers. But there's this middle ground. I mean, obviously, it's part of the name. But you are traveling from being a little kid into being a young adult, and they're kind of in no man's land, and they don't know exactly how to land, and sometimes they feel young, and sometimes they want to feel older. But we get to guide them through that. I mean, it's pretty cool as a parent especially to say, I'm going to help you on that journey from small to bigger, and help you navigate some of the potholes. So, dude, I think it thrills me.
So if I've got my middle school coming up, what do I need to be thinking about? What's on my radar? What? Because I'm going to speak for 2 seconds. I don't like to speak on top of my guests, but I think there's this thing called accidental adolescence where parents of children kind of get lulled by this, sweet little spot of life that the kids are awesome and amazing, and then all of a sudden they, without thinking about it, run into adolescence, right?
Absolutely.
It kind of works that way a lot of times. Well, we always hear my child turned into this overnight, that whole thing.
Not true. Yeah, it really is a journey, obviously, but it's also this already not yet kind of a piece. All right, they're aspiring to some things about being older, but they're also not yet ready to leave some of being a kid behind, and so you live with one foot in both. And I think sometimes, I don't think it is overnight. I think it's a roller coaster. It's not even a steady climb, because some days they're acting like, they ought to be in 8th grade. And other days they're acting like they ought to be in 2nd grade. And you're like, okay, what do I get? And sometimes that can switch within the afternoon. So it's just interesting. But you just paying attention to it and not lulling yourself to sleep, because I think there's a sweet spot in late elementary school. Things get maybe a little bit easier in not all cases, but in some cases. And then guess what? Some hormones are going to hit. Some puberty is going to hit. It's fun to just say puberty in the job I get. I mean, I say puberty a lot, but I mean, just watching for that and watching for the signs, because it's not like a flip of a switch. So,
well, what about puberty? We just
what
talked about
puberty, Jeremy?
My son's going to go into that, and friends who have daughters that are about to go into that. And that particular part, the physical development,
Right.
there's a lot to be thinking about when we're coming upon that stage. So help us with that. Guide us through that.
Well, it's interesting because obviously that's the most outward sign, right, of the whole journey. But where it crosses with so many other dimensions of it, a middle school kid, so many times they're developing at a rate, they're either early, late, somewhere in between, and some of their best friends are on different plans than that, right? So, a girl's been friends with her buddy all the way through kindergarten, all the way to 4th, 5th grade, and then one of them kind of takes the leap sooner. Well, guess what? Her whole world changed in a different way than her friend. The 6th grade boy who is kind of maybe late to the puberty party. Did I just say puberty party?
You did.
I didn't mean to say that. But then his buddy's already like growing a mustache, and he's like, hang on a second. Like so outwardly is part of it, but then what that does inside. And I don't know a single middle school kid who feels like they're developing normally, right? I'm either too much of this or too little of that. It's just interesting to watch that and to track with how it's making them feel at the same time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as a parent of a middle schooler, what are the consistent messages that I want to be sending to my teenager through these years? What do I want to be repeating over and over and over again and making sure they're hearing from me?
Yeah. Well, some of them, Jeremy, I think are just carryovers from when they're younger. I mean, obviously, you're valued, you're treasured, you're loved. But here's one that I think is unique to these years. I feel like a middle school kid is starting to ask more questions, maybe different questions. And they're going to ask from a whole bunch of different places, right? They might ask you some of those kind of questions. They're certainly paying attention to what their friends say about those things. When they get confused and they've got a question that they feel a little embarrassed about, they might ask their friends. They might ask you. Where else are they going to ask? They're going to ask Google. They're going to try and figure some of those kind of things out. So one of the messages that for me, and my boys are 16, 18, and 19 now, through that whole era is to just have the openness of conversation. Sometimes they want it, sometimes they don't, but to say, listen, I love you so much. And as a result of that, I want to tell you the truth about stuff. I want you to know what's real. I want you to not have embarrassment about coming to me about, because we're a family, right? That's what families talk about. I'm not going to use that information to embarrass you somewhere else. You'll never really guess what my kid asked me the other day. Isn't that funny? And some parents do that. Some parents, they sort of make fun of the phase, and you just can't do that, whether you're a parent or whether you're a youth minister. I mean, you've been in youth ministry. Middle school kids are ridiculously easy to make fun of, right? Because of stuff they don't know. But every time that we give into that, we lose a little trust with that. And it makes them think twice about, am I going to ask you a question that way? So for you with your son, and I know you're an intentional dad, but to keep those lines open and keep looking him in the eye and say, not only do I love you so much, I want to be part of this. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to give you as much information as you want or need because it matters. And I don't want you having to wonder if your buddy who acts like he knows everything is actually telling you what's true. Does that make some sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think if you're going to minister and be around middle schoolers, you've got to love awkwardness. And if you're going to parent one, you just got to start. If you aren't a fan of awkwardness, start getting used to it, start loving it, right?
Absolutely. And it's our job, right? I mean, like, we've got to embrace the awkwardness because it's coming. You can't escape it. You can't escape it. So the number of times I'd be at my dinner table, and again, advantage, I've got 3 boys, so, kind of same gender thing. But I just say, hey, this is going to be awkward, but we're going to talk about it. And then they start to get used to that. And they're like, okay, this is what our family does. And it doesn't get used against us in a social setting later. And I don't get laughed at in the middle of that. But kids want to know stuff, and they're trying to figure stuff out. And when they feel like they've got that trust there, I think it changes things that way. So...
yeah, and I'm going to insert a question here on you, but it's the transition of innocence, because this is the stage where they start to lose the childhood innocence, and parents grieve that, don't they?
Absolutely.
And how can a parent move into this new world where their child isn't as innocent as they used to be, and they need to know about things? And how can we navigate that?
Well, I think your point is excellent, Jeremy, because this loss of innocence happens earlier than we want it to, right? The number of times that I had to look at one of my sons and think, it feels too early to have this conversation with you. I don't want to have to, kind of end that part of the innocence. But if I'm going to serve you in the world that we live in, I can't change the climate, right? I can't change the world that they live in, but I've got to help them figure out how to navigate it, right? I can't change the water level of the ocean, but I can teach you how to swim in it and how to figure that piece out. And there is some grieving. I think you just have to, because I watch some parents and they try and protect and they try and say, oh, my kid hasn't, my kid doesn't. And I want to say, really? I don't know that that's true. When I'm with parents, sometimes I'll read a list of about 8, 10, 12 terms, sexually charged terms that I say, your kid is going to hear this word before they're done with middle school. Who's going to define that for them? Is it Connor on the bus who thinks he knows everything? Is it Google? Well, who's going to define that for him? And there really is. There's a grief in that. But as parents, we just got to say, all right, when our kid went to school for the first time, when your kid went to kindergarten, there was a part of that. You're like, oh, I want to keep him home. But you don't, because that's not what's best for him. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And trying to figure out, not to push too hard, not to give them like a high school level when they're 10 years old, but not to keep them 6 years old when they're 10 or 11 years old, if that makes sense.
I love that. Okay, so there's going to be this friendship drama. That's part of these years.
Sure.
So if I'm a parent of a middle schooler, how do I help navigate the friendship drama phase of things?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and I feel like part of it is it's coming, right? You can't circumvent the drama. Again, you've got to try and figure out how to help a kid navigate that and what's that going to look like for them. So developmentally, not just physically, not just emotionally, but even cognitively, intellectually, and we talk about this in our book a little bit, there are things going on that just don't add up, that just don't make sense. And so as a parent, we'll say, you describe that friendship scenario, and you think to yourself, that shouldn't be that way, or that's not... But it's not normal. I mean, it's early adolescence. It's part of it. And so trying to figure out and help them make sense of it, help them navigate it. I've got sons, so I've seen a lot of stuff with middle school boy stuff. And a middle school boy, sometimes they get a bad rap. They can't pay attention. They can't focus, et cetera, et cetera. I think in some ways they can, but they're trying to make sense of their world that way.
Yeah.
And can I diverge for just a second and talk about a situation from just this past weekend? Was in a middle school small group and with a newer small group leader, 7th grade boys, and there was one middle school boy who you could tell the other guys in the group were getting a little exasperated with him because he was just not on target. They're trying to have a conversation. So I'm sitting in kind of watching this leader in this group, and I look over at this kid and I say, hey, can you give me a hand with something? And he's like, what? I was like, so I kind of pulled him out of the room under the guise of having him help me do me a favor. I sit down with him and I say, hey, I'm noticing that you don't seem that into what's going on. You're kind of distracting. Like, can you talk to me about that? And long story short, he said, listen, I've heard this stuff before. Like, the particular part of the Bible we're talking about, he's like, I get this, so I'm just not that into it. And I said, hey, have you ever considered that maybe other guys in the group are actually taking cues from you, and you might actually make it easier or harder? Because I think this kid, as I watched him, he's influencing the kind of the level of where the group is going. And as I watched this kid, I said, I think you've got more to do with this than you might think. And so we talked about this for just a minute or two. And I said, I think you could change the trajectory of where that group is going. And this was a beautiful moment. This kid looks at me, he pauses, and he said, can I ask you a question? I was like, anything. And he goes, you got to promise me that you'll tell me the truth no matter what. And he's got me right now. I'm intrigued, right? And he said, do you have this conversation with a lot of kids? Because essentially I'm telling him, I think you're a leader. I think you can shape that group. And then he said to me, I experienced that some adults will say something to one kid and act like they're just saying it to them, but they say it to a lot of kids. And I said, you're just proving my point right now, because not everybody would see what you're seeing there. You really do have the ability to shape the group. So we had this conversation. We walk back into the group, and it sounds like I'm making, stories don't always go this way, right? But so we walk back in the group. There's maybe 7 or 8 minutes left in the small group conversation. He sits quietly for about a minute as we re-enter the group. The leader pitches another question, and this kid weighs in on it with a kind of a serious answer. And for the next 6 minutes of this group, they had a fantastic conversation. So as soon as the group dismissed, I pull him over. And I'm like, did you see what just happened? And he gets kind of sheepish, and he's like, and I think he wanted to believe it, but wasn't sure in the midst of it. So back to your question about friendship drama, the drama is there for a reason, right? They can't always put their finger on it, they can't always articulate it, but if we can be good question askers, if we can dig down below a little bit, one of the things I'm fond of talking about with our leaders right now is saying, junior high ministry, I don't think is about having all the answers for middle school kids. Mm-hmm. But it's so much about knowing the next right question. And we're trying to be better question askers in our junior high ministry right now. And for me as a parent, for you as a parent, if you can become a great question asker, I think that's half the battle.
I love that. And parents have to know that there's a reshuffling of the deck. Elementary schools feed into middle schools, so that there's a whole new element of friendships that are developed.
Yep.
New affinities.
Yep.
Boys and girls relate to each other. I've heard once boys are in packs, girls are in. How do they? Have you heard any of that?
I know what you're talking about, and again, it's about depth of relationship to some, to some degree. But when you say that, friendships do shift, right? And parents sometimes we forget that. Marco and I sometimes will say you move from friendships of proximity, right? The kid who's down the street, the kid who plays on your team, or to friendships of affinity.
That's good. That's what I'm looking for.
It was someone who lived 2 doors down, and then maybe mom looks at her 6th grade son and says, "Why don't you play with Joey anymore?" And the kid is going, "Mom, Joey's a dork, or Joey's a jock, and I'm not, or Joey's whatever." And they go to the same bus stop, but they used to play Legos together, and now they're just kind of moving into different social groups, which is hard for the kid in some ways, but it's also kind of a natural order of things. They're gravitating towards something they've got a passion for, and maybe it's not the same passion as the kid who lives 2 doors down anymore, but it's a reshuffling. I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, and all of us as adults have those friendships that we had as we could say I was friends with them as a kid, but
right.
Later on in life we just kind of went our own way. Well, that's what that is, and it kind of happens, and it's going to happen to my son and all those middle school kids that we're parents that we're talking to.
And where it gets complicated is, let's say that they were friends as younger kids, and you were friends with their parents. So your friendship as parents hasn't changed, but their friendship as kids may have changed greatly in that amount of time, and so that adds another layer of awkwardness. So we got to embrace it and move forward in it. So.
I love it. Okay, so the role of a small group leader in the life of a middle schooler, that's got to be pretty important. So why should I make it a priority to have another trusted adult in my middle schooler's life?
Yeah. Well, and this could fly in the face of the whole parenting thing and go, well, if we're great parents, shouldn't we be able to do it all? Couple things come to mind for me on that. I think there comes a stage where a kid starts to look at you, Jeremy, as dad and say, okay, I get that this is what you think, but what if my dad is unusual that way? What if he's weird? What if this is just him? I got to test that out with some other people. And if he can look to some other Jesus-following people and say, okay, let me find out kind of what their operating system looks like, and it's not just my weird dad. Again, no matter how great your relationship is with your kid, I think there comes a time where they're starting to look around and go, okay, what about other families? What about other people? And for me, again, part of it's ministry related with my own kids, but I wanted to make sure that I put my kids into environments where they would have other men, if I had daughters, other women that they could look to that way. I just texted yesterday or the day before, my senior in high school, his middle school small group leader, because they still stay in touch. Actually, they stay in touch pretty regularly. And I said, I don't think I've thanked you enough for how big of an influence you've been with my son, because I think my son kind of fact-checked some things that Dad said off of what Coop said. And if Coop agreed, and Coop's another dad, he's got younger kids than me, but it was such a fantastic relationship that way. And again, as he's looking at me, Dad, and trying to figure that piece out, but then can double-check it in some other places, it's fantastic.
The biggest mistake in the world is to see that as some kind of competition. You've got to embrace it and see them as a team member, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so you have been, let me see, where do I want to go? I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next with you here. Let me put this. It's hard to believe, but my son's going to transition from middle school to high school at some point, and for all parents, they're going to have that process. So you are making that transition a lot in your ministry. You move every year, you move a group on into high school. So how do we prep them for that transition? Because middle school is so transitional. It's really a 3-year process in most cases. So maybe 4 in some. But so it's just it's like you're in, you have just a little bit of time, and then you're starting to go out.
Yep.
So how do you handle that transition?
Well, I think even as you're describing, so much of it is looking to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. Because ultimately with our kids, with the kids we have in our families, with the kids we minister to, what are we trying to prep them for, right? We're trying to prep them for an independent life following Jesus. I mean, that's the end game at that point. And so I'm sometimes guilty of looking ahead too often and too much. But I think that's part of the whole deal is what's coming next. How can I prep them for that? And how can I figure out what I'm holding on to? Because again, back to your conversation before, there's some grief in the midst of that. But I'm always looking and saying, how are the things that I'm doing now, getting them ready for middle school, for later middle school, for high school? When when a sixth grader comes in, they're a big child in most cases. They're a big child. They look like a little bit like a kid. And as they get older, puberty hits, they get a little less cute in some places. The acne starts to sprout in and this whole bit. But when they head towards high school, a good chunk of them are taller than me at that point. I remember these little kids coming in, and when the week that we graduate our 8th graders out of the junior high room and bring in the new 5th graders, the average height in the room shrinks by, about 10 inches. You look across the room, you're like, where'd all the big people go? But I think it's anticipation of this and trying to figure out how you can continue to reach, through them while they are in high school. So I don't know if that's close to what you're going for, but it's the anticipation, Jeremy. It's always growing, changing, and that's part of the advantage of having done it for so long is I can look back to middle schoolers who are now married. They now have their first kid, and it blows my mind. But that 7th grader in your group, not only they're not going to stay in 7th grade forever, they're not going to stay in high school forever. We're trying to prep them for an independent adult life following Jesus. And it's hard to do that magic in your mind when you look at that 7th grade innocent looking face and imagine them where they're going to be.
Thank you, Scott Rubin. What projects are you working on right now that are exciting to you?
Well, I really am trying to figure out how do we serve parents in our church better, because I don't think there's one right way to do that. Another thing I'm working on is kind of a project of how do we help new believer students, which is kind of cool to me. We make such a big emphasis sometimes of helping a kid make a decision to follow Christ. And then what? What happens after that? So working on a little project there, a resource that I think could be helpful for youth pastors. So awesome. It's just fun, man. It's cool. Thanks for having me along, Jeremy.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you, Scott Rubin, for being here. If you guys want to follow Scott, you can follow him at iamelevate.com. That's your ministry's website. Yep. And then on Twitter, he's Scott_Rubin, and he loves social media. So that's gonna be a journey that's gonna be awesome. So join that. Thank you so much, Scott. You're awesome.
Thanks, buddy.
Are you looking for the right conference to attend this year? The D6 Conference is a family ministry conference designed for your entire ministry team. Come hear from over 30 speakers and network with churches that share your passion for reaching families. Family ministry isn't just another program. It's one of the most important things your church can do to make a difference in your city. At the D6 Conference, you'll be inspired and equipped to take your family ministry to the next level. To learn more about the D6 Conference, just go to d6conference.com.
Okay, welcome back. Scott Rubin nailed it. I knew he would. He is just as I reflect on that interview, all I can just think about is just who he is as a person. So thank you, Scott Rubin, for taking some time to train us and educate us today. And that was awesome.
And Jeremy, I think your relationship with him allowed us to see a glimpse of Scott that the average person's just not going to get. He is the genuine guy, but it's obvious the closeness that the two of you have, and he was comfortable, and you guys just really dug out some real interesting data for us to think on. So thank you for how you approached that interview. That was just spot on.
Well, it's one of the coolest relationships and friendships I have. And there's a couple of guys like this because a lot of my ministry years was in junior high ministry. So these were the heroes that I went and listened to in the seminars. And then God allowed me to become their friends after years. And that's been one of the most gracious gifts he's ever given me. So I love Scott Rubin. Very glad.
I think people actually might sign up for those 15 years of middle school ministry that he talked about in there now after hearing you guys talk.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Now, speaking of good people, we got Mike Williams next. Tell us more about Mike Williams.
Yes, and I can't call him Mike Williams. He's Dr. Mike Williams to me. So, doctor. Yeah, he has been one of my professors. And I don't remember if I said this in the interview or not, but I got to tell our listeners, I had two professors in my doctoral program that if I'd have had them in high school, I would not be sitting in this chair doing podcasts today. I would either be teaching philosophy or teaching history, because these two are so incredibly inspiring about their subject, and it's not the boring approach. And so I was recently in Dallas, and I asked Dr. Williams, I said, can I interview you? Because he taught in the leadership program that I was in, and he taught the history side. And I said, I want you to challenge ministry leaders who are readers out there. How can history help develop their leadership approach? And so you're going to hear his insight, and I hope it inspires people to crack open and read a biography or read an approach to history that sharpens who we are, understands the context, and kind of moves through that. So we're going to hear from Dr. Williams, and I think you're going to love it.
Sitting here with Dr. Mike Williams. He's professor of history at DBU, Dallas Baptist University. I have a connection there, obviously, those of you who've heard me in the past and think fondly of the university. And Dr. Williams has influenced my life, and I have one question for him that he's ready to answer for all of us today.
Well, I hope so.
You know, there's ministry people sitting out here, and you think, why are we talking with you, a professor of history? But Dr. Williams, I want you to, you have inspired so many students in history. Why should ministry leaders be reading history? How can it benefit them in everyday leadership in their roles?
Well, one of the things I tell my students all the time, Ron, in fact, you may have heard me say this before, is that really one of the best ways to understand culture and one of the best ways to understand people is to understand history. If you understand the context out of which people arise, if you understand the context of which the culture in which people live, a big part of that is understanding history, and if you can do that, then it really helps you to be able to communicate with people effectively. I think that not only is communication a big part of that, but the understanding of what lies behind a person's decision. When you run things through a historical filter, in terms of understanding where people are coming from, where they're headed, where they are at that moment, if you can have an understanding of history, it gives you a different perspective than if you're walking into a situation or into a relationship with people just without any sort of background or understanding. I think that's one of the most important things about it.
Now, let's say that somebody's listening and they go, well, man, history was so boring in school. And by the way, I would quickly tell you, if it was boring in school, you had a bad teacher.
That's true.
So
I would say that
if you had,
I would agree with that.
And I probably said this before, but you know, Dr. Williams, if I'd have had him in high school, I'd probably be a professor of history somewhere, because he's caused me to re-fall in love with history, and I already liked it. But let's say somebody's out there and they say, man, it was boring, I hate it. But they're thinking about jumping back and reading.
Yeah.
Where do you suggest they start?
Well, I think one of the best places to start is to start with biography. I think that really when you begin to delve into some really good biographies, be they of Christian leaders or just people throughout history, world history, American history, find someone or some topic that you're interested in, and instead of reading a survey of a time period or a survey of a topic, find a biography of a key person during that time period. You know, for example, I mean, you've heard me say this before, if you're interested in the American Revolution, don't read a textbook on the American Revolution. Find something on George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin. Or if you're interested in the American Civil War, read a biography of Abraham Lincoln. If you're interested about the latter part of the 20th century, Martin Luther King Jr., if you're interested in the Civil Rights Movement, or maybe, there may be another movement or time period that you're interested in, find a biography, because I think it's through biography that we begin to get glimpses not only of the person, but the time period in which they lived. And then that sometimes can spur additional reading that's related to that subject.
So when they're reading the book, what are they looking for? You kind of set this up earlier, but remind them now, okay, they're thinking, okay, I'm going to go grab a book on Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
How then do they approach that book?
Well, I think there are a couple of different ways to do it. One of the things you want to look for is find places of identification. You know, here's something I see similar about myself or dissimilar about myself between myself and Abraham Lincoln. Or, you know, what was going on in Abraham Lincoln's time that may be similar to something that we're experiencing today. Or that we might learn a lesson from something that's taking place during this time period that we would then be able to apply to a situation or to an occasion that we're dealing with today. I think part of the reason that people don't enjoy history sometimes is they see it as a bunch of dead people. History is so much more than that. History is really alive. History is not something, Faulkner says something about this, history is not something that's past, it's something that's very much still alive today. And so I think if people will look at it that way, how does this speak to where we are today? It can make a huge difference in how we approach history and how we approach biography.
So in the moments that we have left, tell me aha moments, or a moment, I'll let you decide, from something you've read in history, you thought, wow, I'm glad I read that. I mean, you have read so extensively, but I want to kind of lay a nugget out there for our listeners to go, okay, if I jump in, and I think I've known X amount Abraham Lincoln, or I know all this about George Washington, but while you were reading one of those biographies, you found this, and you thought, wow, and here's that identifiable moment. Can you share one or two of those?
Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of things that I could talk about, but you mentioned Abraham Lincoln. I had grown up just loving Lincoln. Lincoln was one of my heroes. I wanted to be Abraham Lincoln when I was growing up as a kid. And so I'd read lots and lots of books about Lincoln. And then as I got in my graduate studies and everything, Lincoln just kind of got pushed kind of back. But in recent years, one of the things that I came across was reading about Abraham Lincoln, some of his emotional issues and some of the facts that he had to deal with depression in his life and how he overcame that. And depression is something that I've struggled with at times in my life. And seeing how Lincoln worked his way through that and how he overcame that in his life and how he dealt with that in his life is something that really kind of spoke to me personally, as well as I think being able to help other people, both as a teacher and as a minister, deal with that issue themselves. And so that's one, for me, very much a personal light bulb moment that was both spiritual and historical.
That's right. And by the way, we have ministry leaders who are listening, and it's very rare that leaders don't face some type of depression because of the isolation of their roles.
I think ministers really struggle with that, and I think also leaders really struggle with that because sometimes they're in situations that nobody else can understand.
Yeah.
Who have been in the exact same situation. You just don't find that. But sometimes by studying someone like Lincoln, or whoever might be the case, we can see lessons that we can apply to our own situations.
That's right. Okay, so if you're listening, here's your assignment. Go grab a biography of your choice. Pick an era that you just love and go read it through a different set of eyes and see if it doesn't communicate to you in some way contextually, like Dr. Williams has said today. Thank you so much for this time together.
Thank you, Ron. I've enjoyed being with you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you to Dr. Mike Williams for talking us through those narratives from history. That was huge, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Ron, again, last episode I kind of talked about how this is going to be around July when folks are hearing this, and we're preparing for the fall, and we're thinking through the next ministry year. And one of the decisions we're going to have to make is where are we going to go to get training and to have a conference. A lot of ministers, not all, but a lot of them are blessed with some kind of conference budget, and they've got to make a decision. And this is about that time of year when a lot of people are making that decision. And I bet you're a little biased on what conference they might want to go to. So I thought it might be worthy to just take a few minutes and kind of just pump people up about the D6 conference this year. Let them know why it's going to be awesome.
Oh, man. We don't need a few minutes. We can tag it in like 2 minutes. Number one, it is the conference that you bring your entire team to. And I say this often, and the ministry leaders who get it understand it when they practiced it. Oftentimes, the lead pastor goes to one conference, youth pastor goes to another, children's pastor goes to yet another, and they all go and get incredible items. What's interesting is when you look at the brochures and the websites for all these conferences, many times about a third of the speakers are always the same. It's whoever's released their latest book about ministry or about some topic. And so you can travel almost and see the speaking circuit that these speakers are on. Why not come to the one place where you can find some of these speakers, but you also find the practitioners specific to your ministry area, and you as a team during the breaks and in the evenings and the off times continue to debrief and think through the strategy of your local church. There's no better way to do this than to train. Think about it as a cohort model. You're bringing your leadership team as a cohort so that when you all get back together, you don't have 5 different ideas. You have one idea that's going to be applied in 5 different specific areas of ministry.
Yeah, I shouldn't be surprised, but you explained that as well as it could be explained. And there's also, you guys got a great lineup of speakers. One of the ones I'm most excited about, I'm forgetting, it's Metaxas or something like that. But
yes.
he read the book on Bonhoeffer.
And his more recent books were 7 Men from History, 7 Women from History. But everybody does recognize him from Bonhoeffer. But Eric Metaxas, very well recognized speaker, author, radio personality. This guy is going to explain to us, which is great that he's following Mike Williams. He's going to take a personality from history and talk through the generational influence that brought them to where they are.
Oh, wow.
It's going to be incredible. I'm so looking forward to this myself. I'm going to dare anybody on our staff to interrupt me during his talk.
That's awesome. And he's just one. I mean, there's a whole, they can go to the website.
They can go and catch Lisa Harper. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole host of, we have nearly 50 speakers out there. And we are known for bringing in the practical practitioners that our ministry leaders most identify with. Our goal is not to bring in the biggest names in the world. Our goal is to bring in people who equip people so they can go back, and you say this often so well, Jeremy, we get people transferable information. They walk away immediately ready to apply this.
That's if you're going to invest the hotel money, the food money, the travel money, and all of those different things, you want to be able to leave not just with a little bit of rest, but with something you can use to make life a little bit easier in your ministry. And I can vouch for that as far as D6 Conference is concerned. It's the only conference I go to now. I love it that much. So I'll tell you this, next week we have a great show as well. This is actually a lady who has already been with us on one of your shorter interviews, but now we're going to take some time and just dig in even more to the topic of ministering to special needs.
Yeah, every time people hear her, they want to know a little bit more. And so we're bringing her back for a longer interview. And look at your church. I guarantee this exists. And you may think, I don't have a huge population. It does not matter. There's a responsibility we have. And it is I call it a glad opportunity to approach this ministry.
So we'll see you guys next Tuesday. We'll bring in Marie Cutt to talk about special needs children in your church and how to minister to them. Very excited about that. Again, thank you for listening. And if you don't mind, subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, or just email us, info@d6leader.net, and just let us know what you think of the show. Give us any suggestions you'd have. We always want to make sure we're getting better and better to serve you guys. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com. And if you're a minister, we invite you to join the D6 Leader Network by going to d6leadernetwork.com.